Hello and welcome to my channel NB Soundtopper UK, and the subject of this video will be rock in the 21st century, highlighting 10 albums which I believe stand up well against anything from the 20th century. On YouTube there are several channels I watch from time to time that focus on rock music. The people who run these channels are, for the most part, either baby boomers like me or early Generation X. However, the impression many of them give is that there is nothing good around in rock music anymore and hasn't been more or less since the end of the 1980s. Even when they talk of newer bands, there is an air of damning them with faint praise and then negatively comparing them to bands from the classic rock era. It's a viewpoint I strongly disagree with. Just because the way in which music is marketed and consumed has radically changed since the end of the 1980s doesn't mean to say that anyone who has started recording since then is only capable of writing rubbish. Whilst it's true that as a creative force, rock music has progressed at a far slower pace since 1990 than it did between 1965 and 1989, there are several reasons for that. Here are just three of them from a very high-level view. One, music has far greater competition from other forms of entertainment, many of which weren't around during the classic rock era. Hence, music has become culturally less significant. Two, newer styles of music have had wider appeal to younger people, such as electronic music and hip-hop. Three, broadcasters are far more conservative about what music they will give exposure to. They're more likely to back a winner, so to speak, and give a platform to what's marketed the most. This is in contrast to the classic rock era, when certainly in the UK, programmes like Whistle Test and The Tube would take a far broader view. Possibly there is a psychological reason as well behind why baby boomers and Gen Xers can be so negative towards new music. However, I won't say any more on that, other than I'd need to devote an entire video to talk about how people, as they get older, can project their mortal fears through antipathy towards new innovations and the young. Hence, my intention here is to debunk the negative myths and talk about examples from this century which I think are well worth a listen. They're listed in chronological order. 1. El Cielo by Dredge from 2002. Dredge are from California, and El Cielo was their second album. It's a concept album inspired by surrealist Salvador Dali's painting entitled Dream Caused by the Flight of a Bee Around a Pomegranate a Second Before Awakening. Musically, it draws upon many sources such as metal, alternative rock, and post-rock, but on the whole, I'd say the album is what might be called art rock. There are 16 tracks on the album, and tremolo picking, a guitar technique favoured in post-rock, makes many of them atmospheric, especially on Sansan, Triangle, and the canyon behind her. This technique involves constructing a melody by rapidly playing each note several times before moving on to the next one. An album with a consistently high level in the quality of songwriting and playing. I feel it's one which classic rock fans might really enjoy too. 2. IAO Chant from the Cosmic Inferno by Acid Mother's Temple and the Cosmic Inferno from 2005. Acid Mother's Temple are a prolific Japanese rock band and have released over 150 albums since 1997. Influenced by psychedelic rock, progressive rock, and krautrock, and then pushing them to the point of extremity, this album sees Acid Mother's Temple take the song Master Builder by the band Gong and transform it into one called On Riff from the Cosmic Inferno, 51 minutes long and thus lasting the entire album. Starting with a slow chant, it develops into the Master Builder riff to freak out for about 17 minutes. The beat drops out, leaving the lead guitar swirling ethereally for a couple of minutes, out of which then comes a stoner-paced section that begins to build back up in tempo. The slow chant returns at around 37 minutes, followed by the Master Builder riff once more, which has a spectacularly chaotic end before the chant fades out the album. It's hypnotic and intense, and a fine tribute to drummer Pierre Moulin of Gong, who died in 2005. 3. Amputature by the Mars Volta from 2006. The Mars Volta formed in El Paso, Texas in 2001 with vocalist Cedric Bixler Zavala and guitarist Omar Rodriguez Lopez being the focal point. Both were former members of hardcore band At the Drive-In. Their predominant style is prog rock with a Hispanic twist that infuses it with a character of its own, despite some clear influences such as King Crimson. There is also a fair amount of math rock, jazz fusion, and experimentalism on show as well. Amputecture is an album loaded with complex arrangements, with peaks and troughs within many of the tracks. I'll be honest and say that it didn't grab me at first. However, repeated plays reveals more and more, which is no bad thing. After all, an album that grows on you can be more rewarding than one that appeals instantly. Cedric Bixler-Zavala has a voice to rival any of the prog singers of the 1970s, with at times an echo of Peter Hamill's more manic moments. Fans of Red Hot Chili Peppers may find the album interesting, as well as John Frusciante plays rhythm guitar as well as lead guitar in places. 4. Mirrored by Battles from 2007. The debut album by Battles, who are from New York, is pretty much full-on math rock, although there is a touch of something a little more experimental, especially with the electronics. So, what is math rock? How could it be described? One way, and this is a personal view I hasten to add, is to think of a guitar solo, but instead of pursuing a flight of fancy, as is often the case, breaking it down into chunks, with each chunk being repeated, leading to the formation of melodic and sometimes complex loops. In essence, a systemic approach rather than an improvised one. Mirrored has complex sequences, but it is also very melodic and doesn't drift into becoming an academic exercise, which some math rock can do. Tracks like Atlas, Tonto, Rainbow and Tidge are all fine examples of what this album has to offer. If an album is a puzzle which the listener has to put together to appreciate in full, then Mirrored exemplifies this, and what's more, each track is a puzzle in its own right. 5. Your Mercury by Teeth of the Sea from 2010. A London-based band, Teeth of the Sea have been releasing albums since 2009, with Your Mercury being their second album. It contains many characteristics that firmly place it in the 21st century. There are elements of post-rock in the way tracks are structured. There's less of the simple verse-chorus type arrangement. The majority of the tracks are instrumental, and the use of trumpet, a very non-rock type instrument, is extremely effective. Electronics are also prominent. If I had to go out on a limb and make comparisons between Your Mercury and something from the classic rock era, I'd say that fans of Hawkwind circa Quite Strangeness and Charm and PXR5 might well enjoy it, in particular the track Acronym. There are others which also blend standard rock with that which is more modern, Symmetry Magus, The Ambassador, and the almost title track Your Mercury, to name but 3. All Teeth of the Sea albums have been released on Rocket Recordings, a go-to label for contemporary rock music from my point of view. 6. World Music by Goat from 2012. Also on Rocket Recordings and still going strong in 2024, the identities of the band remains unknown, and when playing live they wear masks. They're from Sweden, and the story goes that they were part of a voodoo cult in a northern Swedish village close to the border with Finland. Mystique aside, World Music was their debut album and is a mix of psychedelic pop, rock, and Nordic folk, along with tribal Afro beats. The duo of female singers have a style not dissimilar to that of the B-52s, although a lot more feral. However, it starts with the lively instrumental Diaribi, and then the Afrobeat mixed with psychedelia kicks in with Goatman, and this sets the tone for the next few tracks. Run to Your Mama eases down on the Afrobeat a shade, followed by Goat Lord, which is minus drums completely. Detsom Aldrig for Andras stroke Diaribi closes the album as it began with an instrumental, and the slowed down reprise of Diaribi provides a mesmeric and superbly rousing finish. 7. Away from the Water by Lola Cult from 2014. Another debut album, this time from London-based sextet Lola Cult. The name is not that of a band member, by the way. It's taken from a 1967 spaghetti western. So, having cleared that up, what's the music like? More psychedelic rock and pop, this time with a harder edge. The choice of band name is brought into focus through the music, as spaghetti western style guitar is very much in the foreground. Keyboards provide nice textures, and the 60s influence is clear in this. Singer Gun Overby has one heck of a voice, which is ideally suited to the music. Equally adept in subtlety and power, her performance transforms really good tracks into excellent ones, full of drama. Driving Mr. Johnny, Heartbreaker, I Get High If You Get High, Storm, and Highway are all personal favourites, but there's much more besides. 8. Gone by Wand from 2015. The second album from Los Angeles band Wand, it has some real oomph. They make no attempt to hide their influences, and what you get here is a collection of tracks that combine 70s heavy rock, glam rock, a little Velvet Underground, and a whiff of punk. That's not to say that this album has both feet in the past, as there's a more contemporary indie stroke metal, in your face side to their sound as well. Although it's a relatively short album, there's very little wastage, and it's hard to believe that as much as 36 and a half minutes have passed by the time you get to the end. The track Planet Golem, which in part reprises opening track The Unexplored Map, is where they get rawest and sludgiest with an extremely Sabbath-esque riff. The singing belies the music style to an extent insofar as it doesn't descend into the laughable Cookie Monster type singing that can often be found among metal bands. So, short album, 8 tracks, rugged yet melodic. 9. Cobalt Chapel by Cobalt Chapel from 2017. A British duo consisting of Cecilia Phage from Matbury and the Maypoles and Jared Gosling from I Monster and Regal Worm. Cobalt Chapel's forte is atmospheric psychedelia. There is an obvious influence of choral music running through this album, and Cecilia Phage's layered vocals are a real pleasure to listen to. The music blends otherworldly, ethereal, and at times folk elements, along with an organ sound characteristic of the psychedelic era of the late 1960s, and all of these components knit together very nicely. None of the 13 tracks across the 55 minutes of the album are challenging, thus the album has an immediate appeal which repeated listens enhance. An album of remixes entitled Variants was released in 2018, and it's one of the few remix albums I have which actually complements the source album. 10. Meat Mallet by A Formal Horse from 2021, the second album from this Southampton quartet. If you imagine throwing indie rock, prog rock, and math rock into a melting pot, you might well come out with something similar to A Formal Horse. It's energetic, well played, and lyrically clever, at times surrealistic. If I'm a fan of Cecilia Phage's voice on Cobalt Chapel, then I'm even more so of A Formal Horse's singer, Hayley McDonnell. Her voice has great range, power, and ability to brilliantly express the lyrics. For me, the tracks I'm a Lasagna, Rose Train, Space 8, You've Got a Billion and I've Got a Half, and this one's Just a Warning all stand out, with the remaining tracks hot on their heels. Definitely one of my favourite albums from this century. There we are, some examples of what I think of as excellent rock music in the 21st century. Of course, none of them are household names, but if you're a fan of music, you'll know full well that the kind of success and exposure experienced by bands in the classic rock era just isn't possible anymore without massive promotion. The days of being spoon-fed a broad range of music have gone, and if you want to find something new that you might like, you've got to drag your ass away from the telly and start trawling the internet, which is not as difficult as some might believe. If you feel so inclined, feedback as per the graphic above would be welcome, but for now, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.